Treasure. The public will be able to pay their respects to former First Lady Barbara Bush tomorrow when she lies in repose at church in Houston. Mrs. Bush's funeral is scheduled for Saturday. Casey Stegall joins us live there from Texas, and how the community will pay tribute to the former First Lady tonight, actually. Casey?
Yeah, Harris, there is a flurry of activity in multiple spots, not only here in Houston, but up at College Station as well. We are outside of where the bulk of it is happening, this majestic church back here, St. Martin's Episcopal Church. The flags you can see at half-staff. Crews have been loading in equipment all morning. Tomorrow, thousands will file through here to pay their respects and say goodbye. Barbara Bush will lay in repose from noon until midnight. Such large crowds expected, shuttle buses will be running. Then the next day, on Saturday, more than 1,500 dignitaries expected to attend the invite-only funeral service, also here at St. Martin's, before a private burial up at College Station, Texas. The Presidential Library and Museum, George H.W. Bush. And tonight across town, boy, this is going to be a special sight. Look at this, Houston City Hall lit up in all blue. Thousands expected to attend the Houston-sponsored Celebration of Life event, honoring the contributions made by former First Lady Barbara Bush. That all starts at 6 o'clock Central Time, 7 Eastern. Jam-packed few days, Harris, commemorating a very special woman.
Casey Stegall from Texas, thank you. We'll be right back. The bottom of the screen. Now, Dana.
This is a Fox News Alert, a live picture as Air Force One is set to depart the Naval Air Station Key West en route back to Mar-a-Lago. President Donald Trump says a briefing he received on anti-drug trafficking efforts provided a great education. Trump says drugs are flowing into our country through the Pacific and the Caribbean. Earlier, he also made another pitch for a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border to help stop drug smuggling. Trump is staying in Florida through the weekend after hosting Japan's prime minister at Trump's estate in Palm Beach earlier in the week. And another Fox News Alert, President Trump's pick to leave the State Department, leaving a meeting with Kentucky Senator Rand Paul just about an hour ago. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. The Republican lawmaker had said he would not support Pompeo to be the next Secretary of State before agreeing to take today's meeting at the behest of Donald Trump. Rich Edson is live at the State Department. Rich, I thought that was a pretty wise move of the president to suggest this meeting.
Yeah, and just after the president suggested it, Dana, the president spoke with Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, asked him to meet with Mike Pompeo, the CIA director, and that just happened on Capitol Hill. The CIA director meeting with the only Republican to publicly oppose his nomination as Secretary of State. That meeting happening for about 45 minutes in Rand Paul's office. Shortly after the president nominated the CIA director to be Secretary of State, Paul said that he would vote against him. The Kentucky Republican argues that Pompeo advocates for an enduring American military presence overseas. He says it would be a big deal to change his mind on Pompeo. Now, Paul's office, nor Paul himself, have said if this meeting has changed his mind, how the meeting went, if he plans on at least considering voting for Pompeo, or just forget about it. Now, Paul's Republican colleagues say he is out of the Republican mainstream on this issue.
As to Rand Paul, you say you support the president. Here's a really good chance to do something about it. If you want to avoid war with North Korea, somebody needs to do something different. I can't believe that Mr. Pompeo is not qualified by any definition. Now, if you're looking for a libertarian, you're not going to get one.
There is also an undecided Republican on Pompeo's nomination. That's Arizona Senator Jeff Flake. Republicans have a narrow Senate majority, and they will likely need some Democratic support to confirm Pompeo. They're targeting Democrats from Republican-leaning states and the 15 senators in the Democratic caucus who voted for Pompeo's confirmation as CIA director. Democrats argue Pompeo would fail to check the president's worst impulses. Republicans say Pompeo speaks for the president. That was obvious, they say, in this meeting that Pompeo had over Easter weekend in North Korea with Kim Jong-un. They say that that shows that Pompeo is a trusted emissary of the President of the United States and that he's already executing American foreign policy. Dana?
All right, Rich, thank you so much. And we're watching President Trump prepares to return to Mar-a-Lago from his visit in Key West. So he's there about to board Air Force One. So we will catch back up with him when he arrives back in Mar-a-Lago. Meanwhile, Syria is stepping up efforts to crush rebel opposition as fresh gunfire prevents international inspectors from seeking evidence of a poison gas attack, putting those efforts on hold. Benjamin Hall is live just across the border in Turkey. Benjamin.
Yeah, hi, Dana. You know, it's been 12 days since that terrible gas attack that took place in Douma outside Damascus. It's been 4 days since inspectors for the OPCW arrived in Damascus to try and take samples, and yet they still haven't come close to it. And what we're learning here on the border is this concerted effort by both Syria and Russia to prevent people finding out what happened. Now, as you say, the OPCW have not been allowed near the site of that attack. In fact, they tried to go yesterday, and they were held back by gunfire, supposedly by rebel fighters. But we know that that is not necessarily true. We've spoken to a number of sources who have said rebel fighters in that part of Damascus were actually bussed out 10 days ago in a deal which was done with the Russians. And in fact, similar deals are now being done in other parts of Damascus. But despite all the efforts of Russia and Syria to prevent people finding out, stories are still getting out. Bit by bit, we're able to paint a picture of what exactly happened in that terrible chemical attack in Douma. We can't get to the site ourselves, but every day, evidence and witnesses come across this border wall with more horrific details. We met up with the survivor of the chemical attack.
One had broken the roof and was stuck. Everybody in that house and at least 2 other houses had died. The barrel was about 5 feet long, yellow and made of thick metal. Doctors said they only had room to treat those who had a chance of survival. They left the others to die.
Now, we've also heard that the regime has found the graves of the chemical victims in Douma, and they have taken the bodies so that they can't be tested. We've also heard that doctors who treated those victims have been harassed. Their families have been threatened if they give evidence to the outside world. But this evidence is still getting out, and we spoke to some people who said they had seen and come in contact with Americans in the north who had taken blood and urine samples from other survivors. So even if the UN and the OPCW might not have this evidence, it appears the American government now does. Dana?
Benjamin, what has been the response to the U.S. airstrikes from last weekend?
There's been a mixed response here, Dana. Of course, many people feel a lot of gratitude. After many years, they feel the Western world had forgotten them, and this is a sign that President Trump backed them. But they say it's just not enough, that these strikes were pinprick strikes, and that on the ground the military situation remains the same. So yes, a sense of gratitude, but also a sense that more needs to be done, and they are calling for it. Interesting that they also say they feel that they are fighting not only Assad, they're really fighting Russia now as Assad's primary backer, and that's the state of the war at the moment, and many of them giving up hope over here. Dana?
All right, Benjamin Hall, thank you. For more on this, General Jack Keane is a Fox News senior strategic analyst. Sir, can you help us understand what is happening there when you send a team in to get evidence? You know, the Russians had 4 different stories last week trying to explain away this chemical weapons attack. Then there was small arms fire yesterday that prevented French and U.S., well, the French and the United States both said that that was preventing inspectors from getting in. What are they trying to prevent the inspectors from seeing?
Well, the Russians and Assad, as well as our government, the British government, the French government, we all know that chemical weapons were used on that attack. So that's a fact. The Russians are trying to avoid another damning report that was done as a result of the chemical attack a year ago this month in Syria. And even though that report came out, again by international investigators, confirming that chemical weapons was used by the Assad forces, the Russians still maintain that it was the radicals that used chemical weapons. So they persist in this lie. Putin, it's about an image thing for Putin. Assad does not care. He doesn't care that people know he's used chemical weapons. He knows for a fact that everybody in that area knows what happened, and he would use chemical weapons again if it suits his military purposes. After all, after he used the chemical weapons on this final holdout in Damascus, after 6 years trying to secure the city, this final holdout, he couldn't get it done with conventional weapons. He used chemical weapons, and the rebels left.
Take a listen, sir, to the Joint Chiefs, Lieutenant General Kenneth McKenzie, on that very issue about Syria's ability to conduct more strikes.
they will have the ability to conduct limited attacks in the future. I would not rule that out. However, as they contemplate the dynamics of conducting those attacks, they've got to look over their shoulder and be worried that we're looking at them and we'll have the ability to strike them again should it be necessary.
Do you think that last weekend's attack really did sort of give a brushback pitch enough to Assad to know that he shouldn't do this again?
Yeah, I just think that the purpose of the attack was misguided. The first attack that we made, the purpose was to deter Assad. But obviously that didn't work because he came back and used chemical weapons a year later. The purpose of last Friday's attack should not be to deter him. That's already failed. Take all the capability away from him for him to be able to do another attack. And that would have meant all his Air Force, rotary fixed wing, his artillery, take as much chemical weapons down as you can, but you can't get all of it. That would have had meaning, and we wouldn't be in this position of waiting for another chemical attack.
Well, I have you. I wanted to ask you about Mike Pompeo, who just, he's a CIA director who just had a meeting with Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky, who had said he was going to vote against him. President Trump asked Senator Paul to meet with Mr. Pompeo, and they had a meeting today. And this is happening right at the time that we've learned that Mike Pompeo had actually gone to Pyongyang to try to set up the parameters for a possible meeting with Kim Jong-un. And he met with Kim Jong-un, and yet it looks like he's going to have a hard time getting confirmed in the Senate.
Yeah, this is the Congress reaching, I think, an incredibly low point. I mean, here we have, and I spoke to Director Pompeo on North Korea a few weeks prior to his going over there, because he didn't disclose he was going there. And this man understands the issues, Dana, and he also knows the profile of Kim Jong-un, because that's what the CIA does best at. And he went over there to stress test Kim Jong-un's determination and sincerity to actually take a positive step to denuclearize. And the fact that the president is moving towards the summit tells me that, at least in Pompeo's mind, there's an opportunity here for progress. So think about it. I mean, Director Pompeo is involved as a principal player in the most significant diplomatic effort that we've had in terms of a major achievement in 70 years. If this actually does happen, if we are on the cusp of actually denuclearizing North Korea, why would you want to keep him from being Secretary of State, given the skill sets he's got? It's all about politics, unfortunately, and it's sickening to watch it, frankly.
We're going to have a chance to talk to Senator Rob Portman coming up in this show, and we'll ask him a little bit more about that. General Jack Keane, thank you.
You good talking to Dana?
Puerto Rico goes dark again. An update on restoring power to territory after an island-wide blackout. And lawmakers meeting over a bill to protect Special Counsel Robert Mueller if the president decides to fire him. What happened today behind closed doors? The Justice Department Inspector General's office has finished its report on former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe and has turned it over to prosecutors to pursue possible criminal charges. McCabe is accused of repeatedly lying to investigators. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is following this for us. Catherine.
Well, thanks, Dana. Fox News is still working to confirm reports that there was a criminal referral by the Justice Department's internal watchdog, the Inspector General, over the former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe and his 4 counts of lying, 3 under oath, as to his role in the leak of information about the Clinton Foundation. What's key here is that the Inspector General can make criminal referrals in 2 ways. One is that after they finish their investigation and they had concluded McCabe had lied to federal investigators, they would then send that information to the U.S. Attorney here in Washington for them to reach their own conclusion over whether there was a prosecutable case. The other option is that some time ago, perhaps a couple of months ago, the Inspector General, having concluded McCabe had lied to federal investigators, then pushed that information over to the U.S. Attorney and then worked with the U.S. Attorney to determine whether criminal charges would be brought against him. The key thing here for critics of the FBI and many Republicans on the Hill is they've made this argument that McCabe lied to federal investigators. He did it on multiple occasions, and members of the Trump administration had to do plea deals with the special counsel because they, too, admitted to lying to federal investigators. So they say there's got to be a uniform standard here. If you're going to get guilty pleas from members of the Trump administration, you should also consider whether prosecution was warranted in the McCabe case, Dana.
So, Catherine, you also have an update on a bill to protect the special counsel, Robert Mueller, in the Russia investigation. What's going on there?
Okay, so that's what I was up here to really cover originally on the Hill. We're outside the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room, and they had a business meeting this morning. It lasted about an hour. As you know, it's kind of a procedural event, and for now, they have put off action on this bipartisan legislation to protect the special counsel. And as you know, the Senate Majority Leader has expressed opposition to this legislation, but what we heard from the committee's Republican Chairman, Chuck Grassley, and the ranking Democrat today, Dianne Feinstein, is that they are going to push ahead.
Congress should at least require the executive branch to issue detailed reports to Congress about the appointment, investigation, and removal of special counsel.
I'm concerned about requiring law enforcement officials to report prosecutorial decisions during open criminal investigations. In the name of transparency, we should not create new reporting requirements that could bring about obstruction or political pressure.
One of the issues that committee members are wrestling with is a possible amendment that would require additional reporting requirements for the special counsel to Congress. But the bottom line is that this legislation is trying to add further protections for the existing special counsel, Robert Mueller. For example, only a senior Justice Department official could fire the special counsel. In this case, the responsibility falls to the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein. And if the special counsel were to be fired, there would be an immediate and mandatory review. And if it wasn't for cause, then the special counsel would be reinstated. And as you know, in Florida yesterday, the president certainly didn't indicate that firing either of these men was on his mind.
As far as the two gentlemen you told me about, they've been saying, I'm going to get rid of them for the last 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, and they're still here.
So the thing to watch here, Dana, is whether this amendment becomes a deal breaker for some members of the committee. And if we get more information on the Andrew McCabe referral, the reports of that referral, of course, we'll bring it right to you here on Fox, Dana.
All right, Catherine, thank you. Puerto Rico's power company now says it has restored electricity to about 80% of the island after a down transmission line put the entire territory in the dark yesterday. It comes as Puerto Rico still struggles to repair an unstable power grid almost 7 months after Hurricane Maria. Puerto Rico's utility managed to restore electricity to 97% of its million-plus customers before this latest outage. So felons who serve their time but still can't vote. A new effort to restore those rights and what it could mean to future elections. Florida lawmakers are debating whether to return voting rights to more than 1 million disenfranchised convicted felons. Voters will decide on a ballot amendment this fall, while a U.S. district judge recently ordered Governor Rick Scott and his cabinet to revamp the state's, quote, fatally flawed system. The issue has led to a back-and-forth dialogue as to what implications giving felons the right to vote would have in the 2020 elections.
Because of drug addiction, you know, I made a lot of mistakes, you know, in my life. I've done some things that I'm not proud of.
Former felon Desmond Meade lives in Florida, one of only 4 states where felons permanently lose the right to vote. That is, unless they wait at least 5 years after their sentence and then get specific permission from the state to cast a ballot. Meade hopes to change that.
I think that there is nothing that speaks more to American citizenship than having the opportunity to have your voice heard.
After serving his time, Meade went to rehab, finished college and law school, even though Florida also prevents him from practicing law. Meade and his organization, Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, are trying to restore voting rights for felons with Amendment 4.
It's a citizens initiative that would create an opportunity for citizens to earn the ability to vote. And they do that by, when they serve their time, they complete all portions of their sentence, to include whatever fines that or restitution that they have to give. Once they have that stamp mark paid in full, that as an American citizen, they be given the opportunity to vote.
Amendment 4 would not restore voting rights to those convicted of murder or felony sexual offense. Tampa-based attorney Richard A. Harrison, who heads Floridians for a Sensible Voting Rights Policy, says that such a blanket policy could set a bad precedent.
There are already people out there talking about if it makes sense to automatically restore voting rights to convicted felons, maybe it also makes sense to automatically restore their Second Amendment right to own a gun. The political issue of the day is never only about the political issue of the day. It's almost always about what's coming next.
Harrison says he's not completely opposed to felons voting, but that the normal clemency process should not be ignored.
Are we talking about a nonviolent felon versus a career violent criminal? Are we talking about a first-time felon or somebody who's had a 20-year life of crime? The amendment doesn't allow anybody to ask those questions.
No matter what happens, it's likely reform will be coming, as a recent U.S. District Court ruling declared Florida's method of vote restoration to be unreasonable and discriminatory and ordered the state to come up with a new system. However, with Amendment 4 on Florida's ballot in November, the court decision could be a moot point. Pollsters like Josh Altick of Ballotpedia say the amendment is quite popular.
In Florida, the threshold is 60%, so it's one of the few states that has a supermajority requirement that's pretty high. But it looks like they have a good 11-point margin. Polling from early February indicates that about 71% of voters are in favor of this.
Win or lose, Amendment 4 could become a hot-button issue, with some critics saying that the surge of new voters would shift elections towards the Democratic Party. And with a history of close races like the 2016 presidential election, where President Trump won by only 500,000 votes, the amendment has given pause to many Floridians.
That's why other liberal organizations are backing this both with their money and their effort. That's why all three declared Democratic candidates for governor have publicly stated they're in support of Amendment 4. And it's not hard to see why.
We should not try to even silence someone just because we think that they don't agree with us. That is not what democracy is all about. So at the core of this issue shouldn't be about how we think people should vote.
Whatever happens, both parties will be watching. If nothing else, with Florida a swing state, changing who can and can't vote could someday make the difference in a presidential election.
You see voting and election law an issue all over the country right now. This is a huge deal. You see kind of different sides lining up on either side of it.
And Governor Scott has already filed an appeal against the district court's order, citing that the state's clemency rules should be determined by people elected by Floridians and not federal judges. One of the men we just met joins me now, Desmond Meade, the president of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. Sir, thanks for being here with me today. I wanted to ask you a little bit about public opinion and how it might have changed from when you started this effort to where you are now. But let me first read to you a quote from Governor Scott's spokesperson on voting rights, saying that Judge Walker recklessly ordered elected officials to change decades of practice in a matter of weeks. The governor will always stand with victims of crimes, not criminals. How do you respond to that?
Well, Dana, first of all, let me thank you for having me on your show this afternoon. And while this is an ongoing legal battle that I cannot personally comment on, what I can say is that what's most exciting or what grabs my attention more than anything is the fact that over 1 million Florida voters have signed a petition saying that we need to change Florida's broken system. And then just like you just reported, about 2/3 of Florida voters are agreeing with the way how this petition is worded, that folks should have an opportunity to earn the eligibility to vote again. You know, and we know that we've excluded murderers, we've excluded individuals who have been convicted of felony sexual offenses, but the folks that have served their time, have paid their debt, you know, they should be given that opportunity to earn that eligibility to vote. And that is what's most exciting to me, because the people standing up and saying that we need a change, that is, to me, an exciting show of democracy.
What do you think, what do you put down to that change? Was there somebody that helped? I know obviously you're leading the charge there in Florida now, but is it, what has been the difference that has made this the big issue in Florida? And what would you prefer? Do you want the court to rule on this, or do you want the people of Florida to vote on it in November?
Well, I think that, you know, we see that the environment is really ripe for a lot of reform, prison reform, second chances, that folks, you know, especially when you're seeing with the opioid crisis and the drug crisis that this country has faced for quite a number of years, how it has really impacted so many families. And so when I travel across the state, what I see are people from all political persuasions, from all walks of life, who this policy has impacted. You know, when I hear the stories of veterans who have placed their lives on the line for this country to come back to the state of Florida and write a bad check and have to wait 30, 40 years before they're able to vote again, you know, there's something wrong with that, especially when you have states like Texas and South Carolina and Georgia that agree that American citizens should be able to earn that eligibility back to vote again, but yet Florida is still only one of 4 states that refuse to get in line with the rest of the country.
Well, it's a fascinating issue, and it's certainly not one that's going to go away, but I appreciate you coming on and helping us understand it a little bit more. Desmond Meade, everyone, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mike Pompeo is making the rounds on Capitol Hill, but facing an uphill battle from Senate Democrats who oppose his nomination for Secretary of State. Ohio Senator Rob Portman is yes on Pompeo. He talks about his chances and his powwow with Senator Rand Paul. Plus, paying tribute to an iconic First Lady, we're live in Houston as preparations are underway for Barbara Bush's celebration of life. The battle to confirm Mike Pompeo continues as he met today with Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, the only Republican on the Foreign Relations Committee currently against Mr. Trump's choice for Secretary of State. Meanwhile, of the 13 Democrats who voted yes on Pompeo as CIA director, 5 already say they won't vote to confirm him, and 8 more are uncommitted. Ohio Senator Rob Portman serves on the Foreign Relations Committee, and I wanted to read to you something from the Wall Street Journal editorial page about the Democrats against this nominee, saying that Democrats say they don't trust Mr. Trump, but in denying him senior advisors, they make it more likely he will govern by himself. Mark it down as one more example that hatred for Mr. Trump has caused many of his opponents to abandon rational judgment. And then right before air, I noticed this tweet from Philippe Reines, who of course worked for Hillary Clinton, and he said to Senator Bob Corker, Mike Pompeo deserves a vote and confirmation as Secretary of State. Remember, Hillary Clinton and John Kerry got 94 votes. Well, you know what's memorable, Senator Corker? Merrick Garland getting 0 votes, so suck it up. And I think this is, the Democrats, to me, had a pretty untenable position of not supporting Mike Pompeo, but Merrick Garland, the Supreme Court nominee from President Obama, who did not get a vote in 2008, apparently that's where they're going to try to hang their hat. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, very different situation. You're absolutely right. Traditionally, secretaries of state are confirmed by huge numbers. Colin Powell was confirmed by a unanimous consent vote. John Kerry by over 90 votes. Hillary Clinton, as just was noted, I think it was about 85 votes for her. But the point was that people believed that the president had the right to have his people in place, and particularly with regard to Secretary of State, the question is whether you're qualified or not. And Mike Pompeo is eminently qualified. And this is a guy who graduates the top of his class at West Point, Army officer, Harvard Law School, magna cum laude, goes on to become an active member of the House Intelligence Committee, CIA, where he's done a fine job, and he's qualified to do the job. The president needs somebody in that position. If you care about the country and what direction we're headed, you should want to have somebody there.
I noted yesterday that when we find out that Mike Pompeo had actually gone to Pyongyang to sit down with Kim Jong-un with the hope of seeing if there is a way to have a constructive meeting about denuclearizing the peninsula, that Senator Blumenthal on that same day said that Mike Pompeo disdains diplomacy. I don't understand how they're going to be able to sustain that position.
Yeah, I mean, I was there for the hearing, and I sat through a lot of the back and forth with the Democrats, and he not only does not disdain diplomacy, he realizes that soft power is absolutely critical. And he said, you know, much like Colin Powell and others who have been in uniform and then become Secretary of State, he said that as a military officer, a former military officer in particular, he appreciates the fact that soft power is the far preferable alternative. So, I think he's kind of like General Mattis in that regard. You know, General Mattis wants in there and wants to have somebody strong there because he wants to use diplomacy to avoid war.
I also wanted to have you on to talk about the online sex trafficking bill that the president signed. He spoke about it this afternoon. Take a listen.
You look at human trafficking is worse than it's ever been in the history of this world, and who would think in its modern day age? And they're using very sophisticated equipment, and they use the internet better than practically anybody uses the internet.
I don't know about the historical relevance in terms of the largest problem in the world ever at this point, but the online portion of it did actually cause a huge amount of an increase and risk for people being trafficked. And how did your bill help protect them?
Well, first of all, we spent 3 years studying this, and the president's right that unfortunately here in this country, in this century, we've seen an increase in trafficking. And the trafficking is primarily attributable to the increase to the online presence of websites like Backpage.com that are selling women and children online. Our legislation, I think, has already, in just the week's time that it's been in effect, resulted in the shutdown of a lot of these websites, maybe over half of them, because for the first time ever, people are going to be able to sue. Prosecutors are going to be able to prosecute these cases, and so the legislation was absolutely necessary. It simply changed the federal law to enable people to go after these websites that are doing illegal activity online. And thank you, Dana, because you've been talking about this issue for a long time.
I learned a little bit more about it, and they want me to go, so I just have to give you the last word here. But I think people don't realize it. It's not just something that's happening somewhere else. It could be happening right around you, even to people that you know, especially younger women. I'll give you the last word.
Every community, and we've made huge progress. We've got to keep it up. And again, thank you for raising the awareness over time.
Well, thanks for all you did to try to get it passed and working bipartisanly. And, of course, the president signed it, and hopefully it does some good. Senator Rob Portman, thank you.
In light of the Starbucks policy and how well known it is to many, why these two men were appalled when they were asked to leave. For this reason, I apologize to them.
Philadelphia's police commissioner is apologizing to two black men arrested at a Starbucks. Richard Ross initially defended his officer's handling of the incident, but today said he, quote, failed miserably in his response. The men were waiting for a friend when one asked to use the bathroom, but did not buy anything. That resulted in these arrests, captured on a now viral video. Barbara Bush will be honored in Houston tonight. A celebration of her life is planned at City Hall ahead of her funeral this weekend. Casey Stegall is in Houston. Casey, the city has been paying tribute to the former First Lady since she passed away on Tuesday.
Yeah, Dana, indeed. Really, this is all so well choreographed, as you know. People have been working around the clock, behind the scenes, day and night, really, to get everything in order. I'd have to say the epicenter of it all happens to be where we are, which is this beautiful church, St. Martin's Episcopal, here in Houston. As you know, less than 1 mile from the Bush family home here in Houston, and where Mrs. Bush attended service with her husband. Tomorrow at noon, the doors here open to the public and will remain open until midnight for anyone who wishes to come pay their respects and see the former First Lady. The following day, Saturday, Barbara Bush's invite-only funeral will take place here at the church. Among the notable dignitaries in attendance, First Lady Melania Trump, former Presidents Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, former First Lady Michelle Obama, former First Lady Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. The names go on and on. But first, this big celebration planned tonight at Houston City Hall. It will be a sight to see. The City Hall all lit up in blue. Thousands expected to turn out for this event. She was so beloved here in the Houston community, admired around the world, as you know, Dana, but she will always have an extra special place in the city of Houston's heart. So this is their thank you to her.
And then what happens after the funeral on Saturday?
So we're getting a little bit more information. We understand that the casket will actually be loaded up into the hearse publicly right here in front of the church, and then the motorcade will begin. And it's quite a trek, some 92 miles northwest of Houston to College Station, Texas, of course home to the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library Museum, also where the private family plot is. And Barbara Bush will be laid to rest by her daughter Robin, who died from leukemia just before her 4th birthday. That ceremony will be private, family only, no doubt extremely emotional for everyone, especially her loving husband.
I called him and he said, I'm kind of a crybaby right now, not feeling very good. He's not he's physically better than he was a month ago, and he's in and out mentally, but he's surrounded by family love for sure. But this was a partnership. This isn't, it's not something that he's going to say, well, I'm going to build a new life now. That's not going to happen. So we'll be praying for him.
And President Bush acknowledges publicly that he is surrounded by that love, and he thanks everyone for sending their thoughts and prayers and well wishes to himself and the rest of the Bush family. Dana,
I certainly think that everyone is thinking of him. And you're right, Casey, I will be live in Houston to anchor the daily briefing tomorrow. I'll be joined by former Reagan and Bush 41 press secretary Marlin Fitzwater and Texas Governor Greg Abbott as we continue to honor the life of Barbara Bush. Rising gas prices spelling bad news for drivers, so how high will they go as we approach summer driving season? Plus, Republicans facing new headwinds, brand new signs of trouble for House Republicans ahead of the midterms. The Cook Political Report shifting 7 House races to the left in GOP strongholds, predicting Democrats now have an improved chance of winning all 7 contests. Ty Matsdorf was Deputy Executive Director for the 2016 Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Colin Reed, Senior Vice President of Definers Public Affairs. Gentlemen, listen to this from Politico today about Republicans and how they lag on fundraising. A whopping 43 House Republicans raised less money than Democratic challengers in the first 3 months of 2018. An overlapping group of 16 Republican incumbents already have less cash on hand than Democratic challengers. It's a mirror image of this time in 2010, 7 months before Republicans picked up 63 House seats during President Barack Obama's first term. Ty, let me go to you first, because you probably remember that 2010 midterm in which the Democrats really lost a ton of seats. Are Republicans not realizing that they're facing the same uphill battle as the Democrats did in 2010?
I think that what really happens is you've got 2 sets of House Republicans. You have ones who have had competitive races in the past and ones that haven't. And where the wave really catches is people who aren't used to running competitive races. So I think out of those 7 members that you just put up, most of them probably don't know they're in trouble because they've never been in trouble.
Well, maybe they do now, because hopefully they will watch the daily briefing. Colin Reed, you're very skilled in figuring out the messaging for campaigns. Do the Republicans realize that they've got a good story to tell, and are they out there telling it?
Yeah, Dana, I think that's the one thing that Republicans really have going for them right now, is that they are all united around their economic messaging involving the tax cuts they passed last year with no Democratic support. And meanwhile, on the other side, the Democrats, they have a lot of things going for them, but what they don't have is a message. They are instead squabbling about issues like single-payer health care and whether or not to impeach the president, but they have yet to unite around a coherent economic message, and until they do, that's one thing they don't have going for them.
Ty, let me have you respond to that, because yesterday I had Meredith Kelly from the DCCC on and talking about the Red to Blue campaign, and she was talking about, I think, 4 of the 5 new candidates that they have put forward were veterans. They're, I would say, probably moderates. They're not progressives. Is there a disconnect between maybe what I'm perceiving in the media in terms of the base of the Democratic Party and then the candidates that are being put forward, which seem much more moderate?
I think that what you're seeing is in House campaigns, it is so localized. They're not not like a presidential or even a Senate campaign, which sort of drafts onto national wins. Though I would say the only thing about what Colin mentioned is midterms are always a referendum on the president. Republicans didn't have a wonderful message in 2010, and Democrats in 2006 didn't have a unifying message. It is always a referendum on the president.
So then, Colin, just given that, are Republicans... You know, what we saw in 2016 is that it didn't matter how much money you had. President Trump spent less money than Hillary Clinton in order to get elected. Do you think that is true in midterm elections?
Yeah, and a lot of these Republicans who faced tough races this year also faced tough races in 2016, and everyone predicted they were going to lose then, and they did not. They won. They overcame the odds. So, look, if these races become referendums on the national political environment, it's going to be a tough night for Republicans. But what these, to Ty's point, what these individual races can do is make it a choice between 2 candidates, and when it's a choice, it's anyone's ballgame.
So I was going to ask you about Tennessee and Texas and those Senate races that are coming up, but we're out of time. So hold that thought, and we'll have you back next week to talk about it. Ty Matsdorf and Colin Reed, thank you.
Thank you.
Crude oil prices are spiking as demand for gas soars to record highs. How much more you could be paying at the pump?